The invite of this event has been floating around on the Facebook, and last week my wife was showing this to my daughters. When my 5-year-old said, "Oh, Baba is the child of the week." So thank you, Imran Bhai, for making me child of the week, and of course for 20 years of mentorship. And I also see Professor Smani, our Smani sir. Uh, Actually, I started thinking about research or really get into this whole academia after I was introduced to these topics in the Masters of Development Studies program. Prior to that, I did my undergrad in marketing, and I had some ideas about economics, but I didn't know what I'll be doing. So in many ways, three different courses within that master's program that Sari have taught us have guided me in my career so far. So thank you for that. So let's move on to the lecture. Um, that's not me doing. Someone else. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Great. So when we are thinking about this inaugural lecture, thanks to Imran Bhai, that you should think about it, presenting a set of research. It shouldn't be one particular study. I was trying to think how to organize it, and the only direction I got is it needs to express wisdom. So I don't know whether I will be able to express wisdom or sort of gain insights out of different research over time. But I think with the title, I probably have gotten a clever kick. So seems like I've had several people reaching out that it looks like a really interesting topic. So this half-life, what do you mean, etc. So before going into the presentation, I should clarify something that, well, maybe have your expectations a little bit cut short. I won't be demonstrating the half-life of evidence in economics. What I really mean is I have been doing empirical research, mostly impact evaluation on various issues over time, and I tried to find a way of connecting them together, how things change from short term to long term. So that sounded boring than half-life of evidence in economics. So apologies for that. So what I'll do is basically talk about a few of the studies where we see different patterns. First, I'll talk about one set of studies where we see the short-term evidence hold over the long term. Then a few where we see how things change or the impact that we see in the short term faded over long term. But I think the third bit is probably the most interesting bit. And that's also a way of sort of keeping in the room that don't leave. The best bit is in the end, is where we see things shift over time. What we see in the short term, the conclusion that we would draw may not be the same if we look at the same over a bit longer period. Right, so with that clarification, first I will talk about the impact, the long-term impact of after graduation program, and it draws on a set of papers that have been published, and I have some of the co-authors here, uh, and many of us have actually contributed in this research over this really long-term journey of this after graduation evaluation. So if I start saying thank you, I'll have to sort of call for a lot of names. So thank you, but then you know where you are. Now, most of you know about the Ultra graduation program, so I would spend a lot of time explaining what it is. But just for those who are not familiar with it, this is one of the several types schematics that are used to explain the model. Basically, it's a package of a bunch of interventions that are sequenced with the main trust of giving them an enterprise, giving an asset, ensuring they hold on to the asset and improving the productivity of the assets so they can get more income out of the assets. And then this is also a time-bound intervention. It has clear beginning, kind of an end as it starts. Those who are brought into the program have a clear sense that this is possibly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that they should try and make most out of it. And there is also a lot of targeting and customization that happens within the intervention packages, be it in the form of what type of enterprise, usually livestock, or the amount of coaching or handholding supports that we receive. The study results that we present is from 2007 cohort. At that time, the unit cost for this model was around 1200 per parity. Right. Before showing the long-term results of our entrepreneur graduation, this is just a bit of highlights of this model has been tested across many countries. This is just a few of over 2,000 randomized control trials, and there are over, I think, 50 quasi-experimental evaluations as well. But the famous ones found there is substantial impact on productive assets. That's usually around 200 USD. Benefit cost ratio in the 5 out of the 6 studies were over 100. And I'll come back to it. Benefit cost ratio makes certain assumptions of how long this impact will last, and that has a direct implication on whether we see the estimates at the end of the evaluation, at the end of the intervention, will hold over or not, will be satisfied or not, and that's the evidence I will present. But in that 6-country application, they looked at the impact a year after the intervention ended. So it's kind of sustainability of the impact after a year. There have been other long-term evidence as well in India and Ethiopia that looked at the impact of this package of intervention about 7 and 10 years after the baseline, and there's positive impact found in both cases. There are a few other studies where some of those I've had the opportunity to be involved is in South Sudan and Uganda, where this model have been tested against an unconditional cash transfer, basically just to see if this package, instead of this quote-unquote complicated model, if the whole thing is given out as a cash transfer, what we get out of that versus this bidding model. And the summary of those results is there is added value of giving the model rather than a cash transfer. Right. Now, the study that I'm going to present, this is, as I say, started back in 2007. We started with 8,000 ultra-poor households with randomized into treatment and control groups. And the intervention period was between 2007 and 2009. After 2011, the control over the control group was lifted, so they were now eligible to receive the intervention. And we see about a quarter of them received the program afterwards. And the follow-up surveys that we have done are 9, 11, 14, and this most recent is 2024. And in this latest round, what we have done is we are going to look at the impact at the original household level. Then we'll look at the impact on the original participant level. So in each household, one woman is usually identified as the primary recipient who manages the enterprise. So what happens on them? And finally, I think the most interesting bit is what happens to the children in these households. So at baseline, there were about 10,000 households, 10,000 individuals were aged below 15. And in 24, we tried to trace, they will did a follow-up survey, and we were able to reach 87% of them. Now, the estimates that I will show are, as we call it, intention to treat effects, is basically comparing the treatment and control group, irrespective of the fact that a quarter of the control group has received intervention. So you can call it a conservative estimate. It's sort of the basic estimate, but also kind of maybe the lazy estimate as well. Is more to be done out of this as we go forward. So this is sort of the whole study is still be sort of underway. So as I showed earlier, this is a paper work in progress. So it's not a fully finished paper yet. So it's more of a whiff of the data because it has come out just a couple of months ago. And here what we see is the long-term impact on consumption, income, savings, or persistent. And say pose livestock values, and I think the most interesting bit is the accumulation of land. We know in Bangladesh it's almost a decimal of land. It may not sound much, but we know in Bangladesh context it's substantial. So this is an example of things holding. The impact that we saw previously seem to be holding 17 years later. And this is just to show how things are compared to the previous estimate. So in this year 2, there was the immediately after the intervention. There we saw some effect on the consumption, but some of you were very involved in this. You know the immediate effect is more on asset accumulation than consumption. So there is impact on consumption, but it's not sort of statistically as significant. But things start to show up later on. So initial thrust is to put them on an asset accumulation fund. And that's what we see here, that right after the intervention, the asset transfer and all of that, 2 years follow-up, which is at the end of the intervention, you see about $600 worth of additional assets, which seem to continue. The estimates are really large, so it has sort of wide standard deviation there because of the imprecise estimate. But more importantly, in 17 years follow-up, now we see these long-term effects sustaining. And in fact, these two are statistically significant if we compare those two with the estimates separately. Now, what's happening here? Why is this long-term impact important? And this is where my MDS lecture comes in, where you taught us this poverty trap idea. So when we talk about poverty trap, we tend to talk about poverty trap in many different ways. You have little of these, therefore have little of that, and then it continues, sort of a vicious circle, which can be you have little savings, therefore you can invest less, therefore you have low income, therefore you have little to save. And the virtuous circle would be the opposite. You have more savings, you can invest more, you can earn more, that gives you more to save, and you have more savings of time. But the critical aspect in economics is a threshold. This, what we call this unstable equilibrium. At the threshold below which things are on a vicious cycle, and above which it's on a virtuous cycle. So that's kind of what we tend to show. So if the asset growth path, so here it's asset in time 1 and it's in time 2. So, and this is the 45-degree line. So how what assets you have? If you have assets at this point in time 1, in next year you will have the same amount of asset, and you'll continue with that same asset. But if this is the asset growth path, then at this time you have this much asset, next year you will have this much, the next year you will go up this, and so sort of you are on an accumulation path. It will be an asset poverty trap only if there is an edge shape that crosses over. So what happens is, if you are above this threshold, you are on an accumulation path, so you will end up here. And if you are below here, you'll end up here. So it can be sort of because of any shocks, you put behind below these and you end up here, or there is a positive shock in the form of asset transfer, you end up over here at the upbreak area. And one of the prediction of this is actually, you should see in the assets, there's a bifurcation, and that's also what we see in our data. So now, what does it look like for our study population? So this is the control in the control villages. So the randomization was done at the funds level. So we have the control village versus the treatment village. In the control village, this is the asset function between type 1 and type 2, which is baseline to end life. Baseline to 2009. And this is for treatment village. After you given the asset, this is the S-shaped curve that we end up seeing. And as it happens, the threshold comes to around 500 PPP, which means if you can give $500 to everyone, you put everyone on this upper side from the threshold, and they'll all end up here, provided there is no further shock that puts them below, because they can at any point of time they can be shocked. And what we see by 2018, there was about 1/3 of the households in treatment group who were below this level. But there are also additional aspects that one can see out of this curve, which is if there are some households who are somewhere here. So for instance, here we're seeing this targeting was really seriously taken. Hardly any of them have any assets. This is a control group, and this is after the asset is added. But imagine there are households who had about, let's say, $400 worth of assets already. You may not need to give them the whole $500 worth of assets. What you need to do is find out their threshold, give them maybe 100 or maybe just a little bit more, so that they're just above the threshold and they continue on an asset accumulation path. So this sort of goes very well with these long-term results that we're seeing, that only there could be many other situations, but if there is poverty trap in action, this big push would result in a long-term sustainable impact that we see. Now, we try to sort of look at the same things from different angles as well. So machine learning is a new thing. So with one of my colleagues, we also tried to sort of try and experiment with our data to see what machine learning stuff tells us. More importantly, we wanted to see if there impact heterogeneity and how this impact heterogeneity differ between the impact on assets versus impact on consumption. So a few things that came out significant. I mean, there are a bunch of things, but the top ones were what was their baseline? What? So as we saw from the asset trap, if the baseline wealth was lower, what that means is so if the baseline was, is lower and all of them tend to go and converge around this high point, you would see larger impact for those who had lower assets, as opposed to those who had assets around here. You give them assets there sort of above the threshold, but they all converge around here. So sort of in a different way, we see that based on baseline wealth, for those who had lower wealth to begin with, they had I think I mixed it up, the positive and negative here, but those who have lower wealth, they had a higher impact their assets. And importantly, what we saw that for asset and consumption, for all of these characteristics, so baseline wealth distance to the nearest market and women's participation in decision making, these are the three characteristics that came out significant. The relationship or how the impact heterogeneity differed between asset and consumption was always the opposite direction. So sort of so another way to sort of say is those who are living further away from the market, they have higher assets but lower consumption. Or in impact on their assets is higher if they're further away, and the impact on their consumption is lower, as opposed to those who are living closer to the market. So that's kind of why we titled our paper as whether to grow your pie or have it, kind of, because there is a trade-off between stuff. Now, coming to the long term, so these are all household level, and this is at the individual level. What happened to the woman who receives these interventions, the participant? There many things happened, but I think the most remarkable thing that has happened is they are not dying, they're living longer. So we see overall in the control group about 16% of the the participants have passed away, and this is 2.2%. It's quite lower with the treatment group. And this whole effect is coming from those who were more than 55 years old at baseline. So these older women in the control group, 45% of them have passed away, but in the treatment group, it's 7 percentage points lower. I think what else can you expect for long-term effect? You give them a few cows, not few cows, a cow and a few chickens or a couple of goats, and then they live longer. I think that's amazing. And we've started talking about these risks, and hopefully it'll sort of give it more momentum, because we know health and economic well-being are interrelated, but this is one of the sort of few clear demonstration of how interrelated they are. Now, when it comes to their economic activities, of course, these older women, we don't expect them to continue working and earning until they die. So the income effect on the personal income, so this impact on the personal income is only for those who are less than 40-year-old at baseline. So they're what, about 50s, in their 50s now. There we see this positive effect there. For everyone else, it's kind of either not there, not significant. It's kind of, there is no monogeny trend there. All of this you can say there is no consistent impact there. And I think from sort of our life's perspective, this is what we should say. And related to this, as they're living longer, they are more likely to be sick. But the more important thing is, are they able to access healthcare, are able to spend money when they have to spend for it? And what we see is there is consistent effect, irrespective of whether we look at those who suffered any illnesses. So this is that conditional average, and these are unconditional. So they are able, even though they are living longer, and because of that they have ill health, they're able to spend for healthcare. Now for the children, I think I'll try and start sort of go a bit faster, because there are some other things coming up. But these girls is what we sort of try to look at. Boys, I will not present much. Sort of, it's not very interesting what's happened, what we have seen so far from the boys, except for maybe they're marrying up and getting a little extra dowry. But other than that, they're not seeing much effect for the boys. So far, it's not very interesting. But for girls, we have some interesting results that we see. So as sort of simple descriptives, they are now 16 to 33 years old. 84% of them are the son or daughters, the daughters of the participant. Almost 90% of them have gotten married by now. 2/3 of them have children. Half of them are evolving an intertwining activity, which is similar to the sort of labor force participation in rural areas these days. And this is their average years of education. So what we see there, this is the sort of summary results. Whether they're married or not, we don't see any effect. One of the things that the program tried to address is reduce child marriage. We have looked at these results from different ways, at what age they got married, etc., and sort of cut it by age groups. We don't see any effect on reducing child marriage. But what we see is this reduction in pregnancy, especially this is early pregnancy, and the number of children is lower. So there is effect on the fertility of this. Remember, this is the second generation of the um, uh, beneficiary household. But the consistent effect that we see is on their economic activity. So involvement in high income generating activities, or how much savings that they have. But it's not all nice and rosy. They also pose a potential unintended consequence of them getting pulled out of schools a bit early, although the magnitude is really small. It's 0.28 years of education, and at the sort of 6 years of education, another additional years of education in terms of economic return is almost meaningless in Bangladesh context, but this has other social implications, of course. Uh, so this is just to show that the economic engagement of the girls, that's across the board, irrespective of the age of the girls at the time of the intervention, and the same for savings. So I'd say for economic empowerment, it's to the second generation, it's happening irrespective of when the girls are getting this intervention through their mothers. But the pregnancy, this is coming only for these young girls. For these groups, we have also looked at age at the first birth, and we don't see any effect there. So looks like this life cycle effect is happening only for this group. And this is quite substantial in magnitude. So 35% of the 16, 17 years old are married and have children in control group. But in treatment, it is 10% lower. And sort of we're trying to look at the mechanisms, and one of the mechanisms for now is they're able to access healthcare when they need. So it's kind of emergency healthcare access, especially family planning access, when you need to let's say buy family planning products, and because of that economic empowerment of heavy saving, that's probably contributing to it. So this is a lot more to be unpacked here. As I said, this is just the first weave of the data, because we don't have to fix this yet. I used the metaphor, the data is fresh out of the oven a few times. Then I thought with some of the recent scandals with data, so maybe cooking is not a good metaphor to use for now. But we will continue working on this, and hopefully I'll have more interesting stuff. But so that to summarize, yes, this is a case of something wholly. And as for poverty trap, you can come up with all sorts of poverty trap: geographic poverty trap, nutrition poverty trap. But this asset poverty trap seems to be the only one where we have salient evidence of its existence. That doesn't mean that, for instance, geographic poverty trap doesn't exist. It's just without evidence for it. Now, this is the second bit where I will quickly go over a few things where we see impact that we see in the short term fade over time. And this is mostly from youth empowerment programs implemented by BRAC in several African countries. So we have papers with a bunch of colleagues, but all of these are versions of this empowerment and livelihood for adolescent girls. Um, I won't give a whole description of what this model use, but just to say, again, it's a package of interventions, but targeting the adolescent girls. They come to a club, which is used as a hook. They do all sorts of recreational activities, and through that, they are given information on life skills, or you can call it soft skills, or as well as to sort of small scale vocational or livestock related type of activities, sometimes additional educational support, etc. And we have done several randomized control trials. This is one of the designs. So this is from Uganda, where we see the most evidence so far. So we basically need sort of cluster randomization, 50-50-50. These are control groups where we never set up these clouds. And the other areas where we started with the clouds with the first follow-up survey, then offered microfinance to be able to see the layering effect of microfinance, and then the follow-up survey. So it's nothing like the entrepreneur graduation where we have 17 years result. This is just 2 years from midline to MCAT. So this is sort of summary of the impact at midline and endline. At midline, so we have bunch of indicators. Because of the broad-based intervention, there are lots of things that are targeted as outcomes, starting from entrepreneurial ability, whether embodied income-layering activities, their self-perception of entrepreneurial ability, to the extent to sort of on the other extreme, control over their body. So in African context, sort of teenage pregnancy or pregnancy before marriage is very common. So that's one of the sort of risks for them. So that comes into this control over body index. So we see positive impact for most of those at midline, but at endline, for much of these interesting ones, we see that the sort of the magnitude is falling. So here you see the entrepreneurial ability index. So this is self-reported. The impact size is substantially lower. The same goes for the money that they have. These are even the shillings. It's lower. It's the index. I think that's the better way of looking at it. Like this, otherwise we have sort of too many indicators, so there's sort of always the chance of false discovery. So here you see the impact is almost half, and the same goes for the controllable body index. So this is an example of things fading over time. And this is sort of another way of visualizing. So this is the zero, and all of these are positive impacts. This is at the midline, and at endline, it's sort of bunch of them are becoming not significant. So again, takes fade. As I said, we have several of these evaluations. So and this is a summary of what we have found. Uganda is the best results. Even with this sort of 2-year, even with fading, we saw positive impacts on most of these indicators. Tanzania wasn't that great. There was just slight bit of impact on economic empowerment, nothing else on all these. South Sudan and Sierra Leone, these were really tricky context. When we were doing this evaluation in South Sudan, there was a civil war as a contextual issue, and in Sierra Leone there was Ebola outbreak, so that affected pretty much everything. More recently, in Tanzania, we tried to sort of go back and see what's happening. Can we improve on this model, given that there has been pretty much no impact? And we introduced this soft skills training that were sort of designed with professionals that sort of separated this awareness versus management training. So I will go into the details of what the contents of those are. But again, what we see is between midline and endline, for all of those sort of things are failing. So it looks like for the age group, whatever intervention we're doing within a sort of year or two, things are fading. And in general, what's happening is the control group is catching up. It's not because the treatment group, you teach them something and then they forget over time. It's just the control group is catching up. So another way of thinking about it is they're getting a couple of years of head start on some of these things that would have happened. So for instance, on HIV knowledge, they would probably get to know about these safe practices anyway in 2 years, but they get to know a couple of years sooner. But none of them seem to result in a long-term effect. The last part B is where I kind of promised. Now I feel like I should not have. Things might be more interesting where things are shifted. So there I will talk about. So now these two are on vocational skills. So there it's two papers from one study uh, where we basically compare different models of vocational skills training in Uganda. And this, we're really excited about this paper. This is a theory paper, not a theory guy, but it's recently been accepted at AER, so we're really excited. But this is on social norm change and how we can think about social norm change from really bad equilibrium to something intermediary, then to a good equilibrium. So we call it sort of low to medium to higher. So let's start with the vocational one. This is probably the most complicated RCT that I have and I would do in my life. This I've already done the most complicated RCT in my life, and this is it. I will not do it again. What we did is we tried to match the workers and farms so that we are able to look at the general equilibrium effect as well. Because you remember for vocational skills training, one of the sort of questions which is at Achilles heel for anything that you find in vocational skill is what is happening to uh, everyone else around when we say sort of the knock-on effect or the general equilibrium effect. You see, you train some, they have higher employment, higher income, but is it coming at a cost of displacing someone else or not? So we try to look at it from the uh, firm side by locating the number of employees these firms have compared to the other controlled firms. So so that's a sort of, we used to call it the way. So on the worker side, we have vocational training and low vocational training. And for vocational training, it's just one training in over 6 months. And then for some of them, we connected them with the firms with the idea that they would potentially be employed by these firms. If there are sort of two frictions in the market, one is they are not enough skilled laborer, and the second is the firms do not know how to recruit them. So we address both of them here, whereas here is just a skill part. This part is just the matching where the information, the matching is done, but no skill is given. So if that that can do anything, this one we called it firm trained with subsidy plus maths, but essentially it is apprenticeship program. It's like that start. So someone gets matched with a firm where they work. We call it with subsidy, but they get paid, and the payment comes from external from the study. That's how it's subsidy for. And we want to see what happens to them over time. And then we had control groups on both sides. So of course we have a lot of results, but I have limited time to go over all of this. But it started back in 2012, and then the survey continued up until 18, and then we had another round later on. So things shifted. So firm trained, this is our apprenticeship model. So if you look at these sort of short-term results, so these are each of them is a quarter after that training is completed. So if you can just look at these two, they are positive, immediate positive impact on number of months worked by the workers. So immediately after the training, there is significant positive impact for this firm trade. Whereas for vocational training, there isn't any significant effect. The other important aspect is the cost. The firm training is much cheaper than vocational training. Vocational training costs, I think, around $500 in exchange rate, whereas for the apprenticeship model, it was 30% of that. So if you just look at the short-term results, well, the firm train is so much better in terms of work and on the earning as well. So even though we unite the estimates, but there seems to be positive estimates on both sides. Well, the firm training is much cheaper. So the conclusion would be, let's do more of apprenticeship model. But it's only in the long term that we see this difference coming up. So this has been one of the things that sort of, at least as a sort of practitioner or sort of being involved with the practitioner, it has changed my narrative or my mind over how how I think about apprenticeship and vocational training. I thought apprenticeship is better because you things are hands-on, you learn better, you can apply and you can get hired by the employer. But clearly, you you learn something better, different, if you go through formal training, and that only shows up much later. Um, this result is to show about the effect of the matching. So here we look at vocational training only, vocational training with matching, and just the matching. So all of those effects that we saw is just for the vocational training, and matching seems to have done nothing. If anything, it has caused some harm. So that's a little bit of a puzzle. Why would matching cause a harm? Uh, s- uh, so if I go back to the design here, so this group, they received the vocational training. This group received the training and matching. And what we're seeing is, if you do just the training, their income is much higher and much higher. So this is labor market index. It combines bunch of these things: the hours work, income, productivity, etc. It's much better. But if you do the matching, it some seems to take away some of the credit. And if you do only matching, that seems to do nothing, so which is fine. Maybe that's not a market friction. No one is looking for totally unemployed people, or if they do, they can find a way of recruiting them. They don't need someone come and help them with that. So that's qualified. And sort of the explanation that we have for this uh, sort of detrimental effect of matching is the expectation that is formed by the vocational graduates in terms of the labor market. So we asked them a lot of sort of questions about their expectations, how many times they have applied, etc. And long story short, what we see is once they were matched, they had a really high expectations, whereas these guys, they didn't have as much expectation, or their expectations were much realistic. Overall, these guys spend more time in searching compared to these guys, and they also took up offers much earlier than these ones. So in some ways, this matching caused some harm. So yeah, um, I know matching is something that's often considered as one of the good to do things after graduation, like, whatever to market linkage. So the evidence here, at least for this market, seems to be, well, it's not such a great thing if there is mismatch in the reality of the market versus their expectation. Now the last bit is on social norm. And the social norm that we are looking at is something called FGC or FGF, female genital cutting or mutilation. Really horrible things. Unfortunately, in Somalia, it's really pervasive. Over 90% of them go through this, one of the extreme forms of violence against girls. Most of them, they get their cut around sort of by the age of 10, 11, 12. So in some of the African countries, it's very localized, and the reasons behind this is, or the way people justify it is very different. Uh, so in some cases, it's done really early uh, at their ages, but in Somalia, it is around the age of before puberty. And this is probably the control over the body. Anyway, so now for this AGC, there are sort of three options. So one is a girl not being cut, and then there are two types of cuts. One is Suda, the other one is Ferroni. The difference is the Ferroni is the worst form of cut. It's really cutting and stitching, etc. Whereas Suna, it's just um, as they say, it's more of a symbolic thing, and it's just a little cut, still has a lot of health effect, etc. But as social now, we can think about this is the best outcome, this is the worst outcome, and this is an intermediary outcome. And the stepping stone model that we sort of come up with is sort of very simple. Is, let's say, if the cost of going from low to high is higher than the cost of going from low to medium and then to medium to high, then we would see people moving from this low to this, and there it is. So that's our basic idea of this stepping stone. So lots of girls, in our case, this would be pharaonic, this would be Sunnah, and this is Ankara. So this is our stepping stone version. This would be absorbing, which means as they move from low to medium, the medium becomes the new norm. Sunnah becomes the new norm, and then the movement from there to high, which is not cut, might be tricky there. So, or that will have a new social norm issues. And the last bit is sort of, you can come up with 30 other versions as well. This is like an ideal case. Everyone sort of moves to this good equilibrium. You can also think about things moving towards this low, if for some reason sort of this social norm is becoming more and more prominent. Now, to measure if the change is this or this, we come up with two estimates. So first is a prediction from the model, which is if the ratio of the unpaired flow and Sunnah flow. So we come up with two definitions. So one is the flow and one is the stock. So stock is number of women 10 plus who have gone through a particular type of cut on uncut. So that's your stock. And the flow is, since we see at the age of 10 where this happens, at a year at age 10, what percentage of the girls are getting these 3 times basically. And this is sort of trend that we measure from our data. This is the stock and this is flow. So our prediction is basically the ratio of the flow of, or a number of girls who are uncut versus Sunnah, it will be negatively related to the stock, the amount of women or girls who have gone through pharaonic, if this is a stepping stone. So the negative relationship between the stock and this ratio. And if it is positive, then we would call it absorbing, which is, it's coming here. So it's pulling towards this. Maybe if there are questions I can come back with, there's sort of, I think, a intuitive explanation version of this as well. But the result that we see is the pharaonic stock is positively correlated. So according to our model, so this basically is showing that it's absorbing. So what it means is the Sunnah is becoming the new social norm. It's not a stepping stone towards Harikat. And this is something you can think about sort of on many different contexts. Child marriage comes to mind in Bangladesh, where you can think about getting married by 15 is the worst. Getting married after 18 is the best outcome. Maybe you could think about 16, 17 is something intermediary, and we can try and sort of predict this to see if we are sort of following a path of stepping stone versus moving towards a new norm where it'll be hard to move away from. It's still better than getting married by 15, but still child marriage. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all, I mean, all hopes are lost, nothing can be changed. Of course, in this model, it's all assumed that there is for external shocks, etc. As a follow-up to this, we have done an experiment where we tried to address what is called non-literature pluralistic ignorance, whereby many people want to change the norms or hold different a certain type of belief, but they do not know what others expect of them. There is a mismatch between what they think others want versus what people want. So that's something we try to sort of address in this experiment that's sort of study underway. we have the results. I'm not presenting here, but the summary of it is we do see uh, there is existence of pluralistic ignorance, and we try to do two things. One is giving them this information, whether that addresses the problem, and letting them to coordinate, like find out who are the ones who hold similar beliefs as yours. And our hypothesis was if you can do both, we will see sort of big significant change. But um, we're scratching our head over it. What we see is there is effect of information, there is effect of coordination, but when you give them both, there seems to be some cost coming to it. Is that the effect is smaller than both. There's no sort of complementarity. Somehow there is sort of negative complementarity. Right. Now these are all experimental data. Uh, this is where it's. I thought maybe I'll just talk about something that is not experimental, uh, and for something I do not have the long term, but maybe it's worth looking into long term. So this is one of the PhD papers where uh, I looked at the long term impact or the impact of and in some experiment at the SSC level uh, on their labor market outcome. And this is special to me because I am part of the experiment. So what happened is between sort of 92 and 95, those of you who've taken SSC at that time, we got these multiple choice questions introduced. And as part of that, we had this question bank of 500 questions. And we realized these 500, all of the exams will be based on these 500 questions. And all you had to do just study those 500 questions over 2 years. And you didn't need to do anything else. You'd get 50% of the mark. So what happened is pass rate went from something like 35% to over 70%. And then it took the boards of education a while to figure this out. Or yes, they were happy to see the high pass rates for a while. And this question bank was sort of listed, and then cost rate sort of dropped. So what you have is basically a bunch of these people in this experiment or exposed period who would have probably failed SSC, now have passed the SSC, have this certificate, do not have the human capital, and they come to the labor market with that additional certificate. And what I try to look at is, and of course, sort of those who completed HSC and above, they were not part of the study. We can maybe fairly assume that they would have passed HSC irrespective of the exam uh, types that we had in SSC. And even the HES 2005 data, what we look at is, so this is one of the tables where the outcome is whether they have any salary employment or not. And what we see is, compared to the before and after cohorts, so this is the impact of having SSC certificate for those who are not in the exposed cohort. So there is a positive return to this certificate. So having the certificate is worth it. Or the labor market is rewarding that certificate for these guys versus those who have completed 9 years of education. But for this exposed group, it's all gone. So it's actually, if you just look at these two, it's almost washed away. So it becomes completely zero. So that's a test speaker layer. It's consistent across a male, female, and sort of use BRAC's payroll data as well, which I have here to see the amount of salary that they get from BRAC, comparing sort of the same, using the same identification strategy. Now, this is something I thought I would put in, saying that I do not know whether this result still holds another 20 years later. So with the new year's data, maybe we can go back and see what's happening to this or not. But something in the context of our quality of education, something to really ponder. So now to sort of try and sort of wrap up, I don't know, I'm sure I have not been able to share wisdom, but maybe some interesting stuff. And I don't know if I can sort of do a sort of the conclusion from this as well. But just to say, we need to do long-term studies. That's good for my business too. We have been doing experiments, so now we have to do more and more follow-up surveys and not do the experiments. But when it comes to social protection and quality of education, we really need to think about the long-term impact, because quite often the policies that are taken are really short-sighted. Like the goals are based on the pass rate would look good, and that's what determines how lenient the examiners go for the sort of exam scripts and so on. For social protection, again, it's what looks good. If it is sort of small transfer for everyone, that looks better than politically, it's more problematic if you want to do intensive transfer for some who would later on not envisage this sport, but that's more challenging. But I guess we can think about short term and long term or some ways. Sort of very but that doesn't mean that if there is sort of short-term effect and that fades away over long term is not worth it. It can still be worth it. Depends on the magnitude of the effect and what outcome we're looking at. So up to say, let's forget about these interventions that only have short-term effects that do not last over time. Thank you so much.